Before watching, Story 2 has adult content. I repeat, viewer discretion is advised. Story 1, Mr. Pooper. 3 of my friends and I were spending the night together on New Year's Eve about a year ago, and we decided we wanted to spend the night in a tent outside really close to the woods. We were laughing and humping around, normal teenage things. Then, we heard this rustling outside in the leaves. Figuring it was just an animal or something, we shrugged it off. At this point, it was nearing midnight and we had a flashlight on in the tent and we were blasting music. That's when all hell broke loose. We heard this chirping noise outside. When I say chirping, I don't mean it was like a bird or a raccoon, but this unearthly chirping that didn't sound like any animal at all. In fear we were about to be ambushed, I demanded my friends temporarily turn off the lights and the music. At first they looked at me like I was crazy, but I strengthened my tone. Turn it all off, now. At this point, they knew I was serious, so they turned it all off and listened. There it was again. This unearthly chirping that didn't sound like anything. My friends and I were pooping bricks, but I was a little bit braver than the rest of them. I had been taking karate for about 4 years, and I'm a very tall female capable of taking down a grown man. So I figured I could take whatever was out there, or at least I could carry one of my friends if we had to run away. They all tried to play it cool and said it must have been one of those screamer firework things, but I could tell they were all pooping themselves. We carried on screwing around for a few more minutes, desperately trying to forget about the screech chirping thing outside. Then we heard it again, this time much closer to our tent. This was the first time I could properly hear it. When it made a clearer sound, reality drop kicked me in the stomach. It was pooping big, and it was almost right outside our tent. My friends and I were about to poop ourselves, so they started asking me questions as to what I thought it was. I was the friend who was into all things paranormal, and I still am, but I've never been a paranoid person, so they asked me. I told them just as a suggestion that it could be a skinwalker or a flesh gate, because I read somewhere that they mock the voices of your friends of emit noises that they think will lure out their victims. I only said this because I thought that could explain the scream chirp, but I think they were really scared. We heard it again. At this point, everyone was pooping bricks, and one of them eventually called her older brother to come and hang out with us for a while. While he was there, just our luck, we couldn't hear the chirp screech anymore. Damn. We hung out with him for a while until we all decided to go on a walk with. The walk was fun, and my friends were terrified because we were walking around in the dark. But I've always liked the dark, as it was so vast and mysterious. I was also hoping we would find the flesh gate so my friends would stop acting like stuck-up little poops that weren't scared, because I could see they were pooping themselves. Part of me was also terrified to see what would happen if we stumbled across a flesh gate. But her older brother had a knife with him, and I was prepared to jab it if he wasn't. Fast forward later into the night, we were blasting music again and playing with a multicolored strobe light. Probably not the best way to avoid being jumped in the night, now that I think about it. My friend's brother had left us his knife in case we heard anything else that night. My friends all decided that I was the only one who would be brave enough to actually jab someone or something if it came to it. So I was in charge of holding the 6-inch knife all night. Thankfully, it was in a sheath, because despite my training, I'm quite clumsy, especially this late into the night. I couldn't help myself taking the knife out of the sheath because it was so interesting and beautiful looking. There it was again. The same, pooping, chirp screech. I unzipped the tent to look, knife drawn, and heard something scurry away quickly into the woods. Since my friends didn't hear it, I left it alone. Everything was fine for the rest of the night, that is, until I was the only one awake. I heard this horrible scream howl much more blood-curdling than the chirps. It kept getting closer to the tent and then backing away, like it somehow knew I was the only one awake. It circled us, made itself sound distant, then come back with another howl. One of my friends briefly awoke and told me it was probably someone having a party, but I could tell she was just saying that so she could get the sleep she desperately needed. Me, however, I could go for 3 days straight without having to sleep once. I was perfectly fine without sleep, unless I had a long day of school the next day or something. Believe me when I say I didn't let my guard down once. I listened to this thing and the location the cries took place. I wasn't about to let some pooping flesh gate or some poop come and kill my friends and I on a night that was supposed to be fun. I drew the knife a few times and practiced slashing the air in case it attacked, but it never did. The pooper just spent hours taunting me, trying to draw me out. I was incredibly tempted to run out there just to get a look at it, but I knew that was exactly what it wanted. Waiting for me not to be in a group so it could pick the thread off, then my friends. There was no way in hell I would let it anywhere near my friends. The older brother had left to go to a friend's house later that night as well, and the friend we were all staying with lived with her grandma, no strong men. I lived around the neighborhood, and both my mom and my dad were home. My dad is a big guy standing at 6'2" and strong as hell, but it would be too far to run. I couldn't go out there to see what it was, even if I wanted to. Even though I'm pretty damn fast, I was weak considering how late it was, and I would become this thing's prey. Knowing this, I just laid back, knife at the ready, listening in absolute horror. You don't know what true vulnerability is until you're on the outskirts of the woods in a tent, with 3 lives in your hands while some paranormal creature is hunting you, teasing you, and you only have a close combat weapon that you're not even certain would put a scratch on it. I sat there in silence until around 6 in the morning when I was certain it had stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. The damn thing had driven me insane. My work there was done as I was certain it was gone. I left the knife on my pillow and a note that said I went home and I wasn't dead, so I could reassure my friends when they woke up later on. I began to walk home to my house with the streets poorly illuminated by street lamps. There weren't that many, leaving a beep of dark spaces that I couldn't see even if I tried. To make matters 10 times worse, my glasses were smudged and I could barely see a pooping thing out of them. I knew it was better to my advantage if I kept them on though, because I'm blind as a bat. I scanned my surrounding my whole way there, keeping my eyes on every directing this thing could attack me from. The pooper was probably just waiting to get me alone, but I wasn't going to let it do anything to me. When I finally got to my house, the door was unlocked to my relief, so I could get in without my parents hearing me. Unfortunately, this was 5 in the morning, and as I mentioned before, clumsy as ever, so I bumped into everything as I tried to navigate myself to my room where I forced myself to go to sleep. After that, when asked, my friends would say it was a screamer firework or some animal, but I can tell they were scared and just trying to make sense of it all. I tried to make sense of it too, but I just couldn't. I knew what I heard, and it was much worse than they could have imagined. They probably thought I mentioned flesh gates and skinwalkers just to scare them, but I truly believe it was one of the two. Nothing like this has ever happened again, but there's a reason we haven't been sleeping outside in a while. Story too long, I'll sum it up. Friends and I camping outside the woods and we're being hunted by a flesh gate. There. Don't get me wrong, I still love the dark, but this turned us all away from it for a bit. Feel free to send me any questions or comments, and I'll update if I ever have a similar experience or Mr. Fleshgate has come back for a round 2. I may share some of my other scary paranormal experiences in the future, but until then, please be careful while camping anywhere. You never know what can be lurking around in the dark. Story 2. New Year's Eve, 1999. I repeat. Viewer discretion is advised. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying they had gone to Florida for a few days, and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road, surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 13, I wasn't concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party as people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many, many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large, sturdy, and like 6 feet tall. And it was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. This information will become relevant later in the story. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears, when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed, couch, a bunk bed with a futon on the bottom, metal, and waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. And scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside. And therefore, I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside, and that it was morning instead of a pitch-black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. So terrifying, laughing crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve. Please let's never meet again. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't know if you were just some drunk visitor of a neighbor, but you terrorized me that night. I was afraid of being alone when my mom was working, and to this day, I still get scared when I am home alone. Overthink what I would do if someone came inside and where I would hide. When my cats make noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate for fear it's someone trying to get in. P.S. My mom had to help lift me back into my bedroom window so I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and closet. We never had another incident at the house, and we moved in town to an apartment a year later. I know some people say these stories are 100% true for immersion, but believe me when I say that this is 100% true. Story 3. Please help me, I'm getting desperate. Well, I was sleeping, and I always sleep with the bathroom light on, so my dog doesn't get lost. He has vision problems. And today it was very hot here where I live, so the ceiling fan was on all day. It's 3 a.m. now, and out of nowhere I wake up to a very strong burning smell. Something very bad. It looked like sulfur and absolute heat. I woke up and quickly went to turn off the main switch in the house for fear of it being a fire. The main switch, it's in front of my room in a way where I can see my room while I'm working in it. Just before I turned off the general picture and turned it back on, I saw a silhouette of a person hanging from the ceiling of my room. Now I'm here at 3 a.m. in front of a McDonald's with my dog in my car, thinking about going to the family's house, my parents. I am feeling a very bad and dense feeling, acute anxiety and anguish. What do I do? I'm not religious, and I don't know if I have any psychotic disorder. This was my first experience with things outside of reality. Comment: what is your craziest New Year's Eve hookup story? And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Happy New Year, and it's den boig fur.